So, Khloe Kardashian detention over now? Full steam ahead for Tristan?
Well, I mean, if you're Cleveland, you certainly hope so. I mean, if you were going to bet on, one player having a surprise impact in that game, Tristan Thompson would not have been high on your list just based on the lack of offense that he provides, the fact that he's been out of the rotation all series. Ty Lue rolled the dice there, and he came up big. Give him credit. I mean, that Tristan came into the game and was the difference in the early stages of it. So we'll see if he can be consistent. He's going to have some tougher matchups, I think, physically against Toronto. I mean, Valanciunas is much bigger than anybody that Indiana could roll out there. But if he's playing like that, I mean, it gives them a better chance to win something.
Because of the depth of the bench, because the Raptors will have home court advantage, because of the bigs that you mentioned, Toronto's a tougher matchup for the Cavaliers than the Pacers were, right?
Yeah, I think the one variable that I'm interested to see is there's still a mental block with Toronto when it comes to LeBron James and in these game ones. Now, they kind of broke that curse. They did break that curse in game one of this past series, but they've been, very bad in game one. That kind of sets the tone for the rest of the series. So, LeBron has had a lot of success against Toronto over the last, 10 years, basically against this group led by Lowry and DeRozan. I wonder if they go out in game one, kind of let LeBron get in their head a little bit, could they let one slip away? And if they do, how does that affect them the rest of the series? Because we've seen them. They don't play the same when they're on the road. They're just a different team on the road, so they need to take two in Toronto.
It's a nauseating discussion, LeBron versus Jordan, so I will not disrespect you and your great basketball mind by even having that discussion right now because we know that they're both great. But I do want to ask you, from a historic perspective, watching LeBron do what he did yesterday in a Game 7, his history in Game 7s, what he has done when it has mattered most, what type of context do you put LeBron into historically when you see performances like that yesterday?
Well, I mean, it continues to bolster the argument that he is the greatest player of all time. It's certainly subjective, and I don't have any, it's a fun debate to have sometimes, and I really can't argue with anyone that has a debate on the other side of it. But, when he plays like that at this stage of his career, I mean, I think that gets, overlooked a lot. That, the fact that LeBron has played 15 seasons, been kind of an Iron Man throughout most of them, has played deep into the playoffs every single year, participates with USA Basketball a lot outside this most recent cycle. He's constantly, playing in, high pressure, stressful games, and he's constantly, succeeding in them. So, yesterday afternoon's game was just another kind of page in the resume of a guy that certainly can be argued as the best player of all time.
Yahoo Sports senior writer, NBA insider Chris Mannix joining us here on the show. Do the Warriors need Steph Curry back at 100% to be able to get past the Rockets in the West?
Yeah, they do. And look, I think Utah's a little bit overmatched here. It's a bad matchup with the Rockets and Utah. Rudy Gobert doesn't have an impact in this Rockets series. I think the Rockets are going to roll, just as easily as Golden State will in their conference semi, because they're also that's a bad matchup for the Pelicans as well because of Durant. But you've got to have everybody for Golden State to beat Houston. Houston's the real deal. I mean, now that Luke Mbamute is back in the mix and looked fine yesterday. They're just so tough defensively, and when they're on the defensive end of the floor, they can control the pace offensively, and they can create some real havoc on both ends. So I think they can roll through the Pelicans without Steph Curry. If he misses game two, though it seems like he's going to play some in game two, but if they get against Houston, they're simply not beating Houston without Steph Curry at full strength.
That's really interesting. So what does Steph allow them to do against a team like the Rockets that they would be unable to do without him in there?
Well, I mean, it's just a shooter. I mean, if it's not Steph, it's Quinn Cook or Sean Livingston or other guys that are dramatically lesser players than Steph Curry. And against Houston, you've got to be able to put up points because the Rockets are going to do it. I mean, they're sometimes gouge your eyes out tough to watch because so much dribbling and isolation and. One guy might have the ball for 22 seconds before a shot gets up, but it's effective. I mean, James Harden, can dictate the pace of play. So can Chris Paul. And, unless you can respond with offense of your own, you're not going to beat them. And I keep going back to the defense, but that's what the difference is between this Houston team and every other Mike D'Antoni coach team. They've got 3 or 4 guys that you can look at and say, they're defensive stoppers on that end of the floor. So it's going to be a full probably the biggest challenge Golden State has faced in the postseason since this kind of team was put together.
Chris Mannix joins us, Yahoo insider, NBA insider, senior writer here on the DA Show. Russell Westbrook tries to do his damn best, but again, the Thunder fall short in the first round against Utah over the weekend and get eliminated. And so the question is, what happens next for the Thunder? Do you think Oklahoma City wants to bring Carmelo and Paul George back?
Well, I think they want to bring Paul George back, no question. And when they make him an offer, which I would be surprised if it's anything short of the full max-level offer that they can make him, that'll kind of play itself out. I mean, I would imagine Carmelo, if they could convince him not to pick up that player option, that they'd be happy about that. I mean, look, Carmelo, I get what he was saying after at the series ending, at the exit interviews that he did, that he has changed. He sacrificed his game because he has. Look, he came to Oklahoma City. He said, "I'll be a power forward," which is something he didn't do in New York. He changed to where he was willing to play on the floor after being, kind of the focal point of an offense for many years. But he has to make one more change. He has to go to the bench. And it's as simple as that. I mean, Carmelo Anthony against second-unit guys, can be pretty effective, almost in the same way that Dwayne Wade against second-unit guys can be pretty effective. He's just not as effective against first-tier players anymore. And I know it's a big sacrifice. I personally don't think it should be considered as big a sacrifice as it is. But in Carmelo's mind, that's a major demotion. And if he's not willing to do that, I don't know what kind of asset he is for Oklahoma City next year.
Yeah, and what does it say about Carmelo that he doesn't realize that reality that you just pointed out? I mean, against starters this year, he just was incredibly ineffective and scored 7 points total in the 2 games, or 7 points apiece in the 2 games at the end of the series. But if he doesn't understand that he's not LeBron at this age, what did that say about Carmelo?
Well, look, I think for any athlete, this reality is tough to face. I mean, think about it. Carmelo Anthony has been one of, if not the best player on a basketball court for probably as long as he can remember. So when you reach this point of your career, it probably is difficult to accept, especially when you think in your mind that, if you give me the ball in this spot, I could be more effective. Just change things, tweak things around me to be effective. What I'm always astonished by, and this goes back to Iverson, among others, and so many others, actually, that these guys don't recognize what being a reserve can do for your career. I mean, I don't know what Dwayne Wade is going to do, but what I saw from Dwayne Wade in the postseason, showed me that Dwayne Wade has a lot left in the tank if he plays with second unit guys. And a guy like Dwayne Wade is still on the floor at the end of games. So all it means is the first 6 minutes of the game, you're not in the starting lineup. You don't play those first 6 minutes. That's really the only transition. And if a guy like Wade accepts it, his career could continue for a few more years. If a guy like Carmelo accepts it, his could. But if he doesn't, I think Carmelo Anthony could wind up out of the league in a year.
Really? You think?
Well, I mean, like what team is? I mean, what is he? I don't forget how old he is right now, but mid-30s.
33. He's going to be 34 next month.
So right. So then the season after next, he's a 35-year-old. What's the market for him? I mean, especially if he considers himself a starter still. I mean, who's going to go out there outside of maybe a team that needs a boost in ticket sales, or wants somebody that is going nowhere and is willing to overpay for one season? I don't know. I think we could be looking at kind of the end for Carmelo Anthony if he's not willing to change his game and be a reserve.
So a year from now, after this $28 million player option is expired, maybe Carmelo is playing in the Chinese league or playing overseas?
Look, it's certainly possible. I think he kind of controls his own destiny with all this, because I think teams would line up for a Carmelo Anthony willing to come off the bench, because you value offense in those situations. You value versatility. There's a reason Carmelo Anthony is so good at these Olympic experiences, because he can play 3, 4, sometimes the 5 in certain situations. If you have that off the bench, it's valuable. It's just less valuable in the starting lineup, especially when you're looking at him now as, a third option, maybe a second option. It just makes it far more challenging if he insists on being a starter.
Chris Mannix joins us from Yahoo Sports, also an NBA analyst for NBC Sports Boston. So you obviously know the Celtics intimately, up close and personal. At this point in time, because of the injuries that have beset them, The Sixers should be considered the favorites in this series. Would you agree?
Yeah, they should be, pretty heavy favorites, I think. Boston, I don't know how they're doing it. I mean, it's, one guy goes down, the next one out of nowhere steps up, and, they beat a Bucks team without Jaylen Brown in the second half, and, for the Bucks, that's pretty embarrassing. I mean, that's a series they should have won. Boston is just all kinds of banged up at every position. I mean, they're rolling Semi Ojeleye out. How many people listening to this right now could have identified Semi Ojeleye a week ago? It's not possible, like for most people out there. So I think that Boston will do some creative things. I think that they'll make Ben Simmons a shooter whenever possible, but everybody kind of tries to do that. What impressed me about Philadelphia is that I think Miami is an incredibly well-coached team. I think they're a disciplined team. I think they defend, and the Sixers still rolled them. And that really surprised me and made me think that Philadelphia can probably do the same thing against Boston.
Who's the most important player for the Sixers in the series?
I would say a guy like Redick.
Really?
Because, I mean, you've got to have – it's Redick or it's a Bellinelli. You need those guys to make shots because, Boston's going to do some interesting defensive things. I mean, that coaching staff is really good. And they're going to try to make those Sixers young guys uncomfortable. So Redick is going to have to kind of bail them out on some possessions with his shooting. He's fully capable of it. So I think I would make him the most important guy.